Music has become an integral part of many forms of media, from TV to the silver screen and everything in between. Video games are no different. Music is a core part of a game's identity. Video game soundtracks are composed to complement the gameplay and guide the player towards certain emotions. The Mario games have jaunty, energetic tunes to encourage your leaps and bounds from platform to platform. The Elder Scrolls has triumphant, orchestral pieces to empower the player in battle. And Dark Souls does things a bit differently.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons.
Dark Souls is notoriously brutal and unforgiving, both in its gameplay and its world. The game is set in a post-apocalyptic medieval land filled with demons and the undead, all of whom won't hesitate to put you 6 feet under. Your quest is to reignite the first flame and prolong the Age of Fire by usurping Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder. You must traverse this land alone. The soundtrack compounds your isolation by remaining silent for long periods of time. Very few locations are given a backing track. You're on your own. The diegetic ambience of the world is your only companion for most of your journey. However, one location grants you sanctuary in this dangerous land. After escaping from the undead prison, you are whisked away to the game proper. Upon landing, you are greeted by the haunting strings of Firelink Shrine. The melody is quite slow. 12 chord changes stretched out over about 2 minutes. Long, mournful cello notes and the plucking of a harp guide the listener to breathe, planting the idea that this is the one location where you can relax for but a moment. The shrine is the hub around which the rest of the game world revolves and is therefore important both in terms of gameplay and narrative. The player's journey often leads them back to this location, and it quickly becomes familiar. Every time you return, you're given pause to reflect on the world in its decay, and your futile efforts to overcome it. The mournful nature of the strings highlights the dejection and helplessness of Firelink's other denizens. Your endless attempts are futile. This is a hostile world, even within the sanctity of the shrine, something which is reinforced midway through the game when the shrine's firekeeper is murdered. Beyond Firelink Shrine is a world of pain and death. Straying just beyond the boundary, you are immediately accosted by enemies and abandoned by the comfort of the shrine's melody. Your journey continues. Shuffling through the crumbling ruins of a dead city, with nothing but your anguished wails for company, you find yourself in a trance of survival, listening out for the sound of danger. You are consumed with keeping yourself alive, long enough to find the next brief respite. You pass through a wall of fog. The main use of music in this game is for the boss fights. Your quest is punctuated with colossal battles with beasts and warriors bigger and more powerful than you. The orchestral score strikes fear into the heart of the adventurer. Frantic strings, chanting choirs, and pounding drums announce the arrival of your imminent demise. The composition of each track reflects the boss it accompanies, giving some background for each character. Much of the narrative of Dark Souls is implied rather than told. The developers use every part of the game's design to tell the story of the world, from item descriptions and loading screens to the game mechanics themselves. The soundtrack is no different. It becomes another tool for the developers to tell the story. The whole narrative is right there in front of you, waiting to be pieced together. For example, behind a sealed door, deep within Darkroot Garden, you come across a forlorn graveyard. Approaching the large grave at the centre summoned the great grey wolf Sif. He stands guard at the grave of his former companion Artorias. You, seeking the treasure of the grave, have no choice but to vanquish the local guardian. Sif's accompanying piece reflects the wolf's undying loyalty to his master, even past his death. The piece takes influence from Baroque-era music and makes great use of the era's instruments. The violin and flute work well together to encapsulate the loneliness of Sif. The ever-present choir gives the piece an operatic essence, particularly when the solo male voice takes the stage. The music invokes the player's sympathy for Sif. You're here to rob the grave of his former master, and he will defend it to the death. We hear the violin crying out like the howl of Sif himself, and the lone male voice singing in response for the loss of their companionship. Each boss has its own unique piece of battle music. These tracks are integral to the boss fights and add another layer of depth to the characters. Gravelord Nito, Quailag, Ornstein and Smo. These names and more become burned into your mind, impressed upon you by the awe-inspiring musical pieces. They work to capture the essence of the enemy ahead and make the player feel small, helpless against their towering might. However, there is one very important exception. At the end of your long and arduous journey, to the ends of the world and back, you discover your final trial hidden below Firelink Shrine. A portal to the kiln of the first flame. Your destination was under your feet all along. You fight your way through the ashen remains of the kiln and steel yourself before the fog gate. Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, a living god, is just beyond. You pass through the wall of fog. One would expect the final boss of such an arduous and dangerous journey to have the most bombastic piece of the soundtrack. However, Upon stepping into the kiln of the first flame, you are greeted by a haunting piano melody. Immediately, the battle begins. No fanfare, no cutscene, just you and Gwyn. What you are currently experiencing is something called ludonarrative dissonance. This is a term for when there is conflict between the story told by the gameplay and the story told by the narrative. Normally, ludonarrative dissonance is something to be avoided when developing a game, as it risks taking the player out of their sense of immersion. When the actions you're taking don't match with, or don't matter to the narrative, then it can cause conflict. However, in this battle with Gwyn, this conflict is used as a tool to characterize Gwyn. In gameplay terms, you are crossing blades with a demigod, fighting for his throne using all of the skills you've learned on your journey, while the music tells a different tale. Gwyn is an isolated and broken lord, worn down by generations of entropy and decay, attempting to maintain a dying world. The piece itself is composed for 2 pianos playing side by side, representing you and Gwyn. The notes dance around each other and become entwined in parallel to the deadly dance of swords. It's hard to overstate exactly how impactful the final battle is. Taking that first step into the heart of the kiln after maybe 100 hours of brutal gameplay. Before you is Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. He readies for battle and approaches. This is it, the final battle. And your rival is a lonely, broken old man, clinging on to the last embers of his rule as Lord. Music is integral to Dark Souls as a piece of media. It uses music in a unique way to influence the player. By deliberately restricting the presence of music in the game world, the developers have maximized its impact. This is a world almost absent of beauty and safety. Hostility is the default. When the player is treated to a piece of music, its purpose is to flatten them, bring the player to their knees in awe and fear. This keeps them fighting back, striving to overcome the impossible odds presented to them. Because, even at the end of the world, when your trials have become too great, you will always find a place to rest besides the bonfire.